About 2 weeks ago, I spent 12 hours living as a single bloke. And from that experience, I realised that these 4 things are what all fathers need to succeed in the world.
Into the problem of evil. Let us begin with the question.
Now, for anyone that has listened to this podcast over the last 5 years at all, you'll know at least one thing about me. I'm married. Not only am I married, I have children. And if you've been paying attention recently, you'll realise that we have in fact welcomed another little boy into the clan. And this gave me an opportunity to see life through a different lens, an old lens, that of a bachelor. So here's some context. It was the morning after, and I was waking up out of bed. And I just got up whenever I wanted. No alarm, no worries. Casually made my way downstairs after getting dressed and brewed a pot of coffee and no interruptions. I listened to a whole podcast without any kicking, screaming, singing, dancing going on in the background. And I just supped on my coffee and relaxed. And whilst I was doing that, I realised, hey, there's some projects in my shed I can finish. Actually, I could finish those shelves, or I could actually build a desk to do this podcast at. Anyway, as I carried on with my day, I got in my car, drove off, and whilst I was at the traffic lights, I saw a fellow washing windows, and I thought, I really should take the time to get to know these people, because they're always here, and why are they washing windows? Why aren't they working in a job or doing further education? Maybe they are, and I could take the time to get to know them, and maybe we could work something out. Anyway, the light turned green and I carried on with my day, and on my journey to birth care, where my wife had been for the last evening being looked after by some midwives. And this whole experience got me thinking about fatherhood and the fundamental role of a father. So I've got the 4 things that I learned from this experience. Number 1, as fathers, we have to live virtue. A situation I often find myself in at work is I'll be sharing parenting stories with another colleague in the break room, and then a younger colleague will pipe up after having listened to us and say something to the effect of, "You're not selling this idea of having kids." We all laugh, and I mentally slap this naive child in the face. But this is one of the distinct difficulties about having kids. It takes away your independence, it takes away your time, it drains your bank account, it puts bags under your eyes, and for at least the first few years, you're constantly asking yourself, does something smell like poo? Now, when I'm sharing these stories, we're just casually sharing trauma. But with this trauma comes an opportunity to grow in virtue. A bloke named John Clark wrote for the National Catholic Register, "While virtue can be expressed in words, it is virtuous deeds that create maps for children. I can help my children memorize definitions of faith, hope, charity, chastity, and fortitude, but that is incomparable with our children witnessing me showing affection toward their mother, rooting for them in basketball games, taking dinner to a family in need, leading the rosary, receiving Holy Communion, and standing in line for confession, for their fathers need reconciliation too." So it is what we do that has the greater effect in parenting. How we act is what the children see, not necessarily just what we say. I think sometimes we can get really caught up in theorizing how to live. We often forget how to actually do the living once we've worked it out. But what struck me whilst living this bachelor life existence for a short period was that the projects I was contemplating, though they may be good and helping me upskill and might even be good for my kids to see, they're not a priority. And I should not be spending my time in the shed or on the streets looking for those in need, because I already have all the need and projects to work on right in front of me. That's my family, my children. John carried on near the end of his article. He stated, "We fathers matter. A virtuous father makes a family and the world better. We fathers matter, and a virtuous fathers make the family and the world better." But who do we matter to? And how do we affect the world? We can easily get caught up when we're thinking about affecting the world in these grand ideas of engaging politics, starting a podcast, multi-million-dollar businesses, or becoming like Mr. Universe at the gym. But it's not through great big grand works that we affect the world, but it's through great small everyday ripples that we do with our family. So the way our focus needs to shift from being a bachelor to being a father or husband is to take those distal ideas way out there in the community and bring them a bit closer to home. I mean, the desires and ideas I was having weren't bad ideas. They were pretty good. But for a person with more time on their hands, and like, Jordan Peterson says, we need first to make our bed before we take on the world. As a father, I have a responsibility. And that responsibility is first to my household. And in taking that seriously, we can, and if it's done well, we can shape the world. Which brings me on to the second point, be selfless. I was watching a podcast where James Baxter, the Exodus 90 founder, was being talked to, and one thing he said was that having children has forced him out of his own selfishness. And it's made him model faith in his life. Again, it's moving that focus even closer to home. So now we're not out in the community, we're not in the house, we're looking at ourselves. My selfishness. How do I model faith? So James talks about the prioritization of time, and which is essential because the demands of a family life, having children, running a household, are incessant. They're constant all the time. There's always something going on. So what are we in control of? We just mentioned time, but there's also how we act and react to our children, to people in the community, to our wife, and also what do you fill your mind with? What do you fill your body with? So I've just said let's not be selfish, and then I've just talked about me. How do I fill my body? What do I fill my head with? How do I react? How do I spend my time? But let's not be distracted, because as Bishop Barron often says, your life is not about you, which is something I've noticed in life and something I think I've mentioned in the podcast quite a few times. So we don't want to live a self-centered way of life, but we do want to live a life that our children can emulate, they can copy, they can see you in the world, being healthy, spending your time wisely, reading or listening to good podcasts like, Curiously Catholic or something. So by all means, work on yourself, but you've got to ask, why am I working on myself? For what reason? And what a better reason is to serve your family. So as a father, we need to have a healthy dose of humility. And I love the way that C.S. Lewis framed it as we don't need to think less of ourselves, but we need to think of ourselves less. We are fathers and husbands now. We have a job. We have a role. And that's where we need to be. We need to have our focus close enough that we're not off in the clouds and in the community thinking of grand ideas, but not so close that it make it all about us. And then this brings me on to my third point. James Baxter talks about in that podcast that I was talking to you about, I think it's the Catholic Talk Show if you want to check it out, responsibilities and sacrifice. I mean, we all know these words. We've heard enough about them. I'm sure every masculinity podcast talks about these. So what are they? So simply put, responsibilities are just doing what needs to be done, no matter how mundane, annoying, and just accepting them, that they need to be done. And then what's the sacrifice? Well, it's cutting things out so that you can meet those responsibilities. And here's where I feel like we're making the sacred the profane. No, we're making the profane sacred. And I suppose this kind of fits into a Opus Dei kind of mentality. We have these two concepts of martyrdom, red martyrdom and white martyrdom. And red martyrdom is the cool one. It's not the nice one. It's the one where you get killed. The red is your blood. But we often jump to the most extreme version of something when we think about it. So when we're talking about sacrifice, we're talking about not a red martyrdom, but a white martyrdom. We're not laying our bodies on the line for our faith by the Saracen sword or something, or guns to our head, believe in God or else. We're laying our bodies on the line by sacrificing for the responsibilities, which are the thriving of these little humans and our beautiful wives. So what are these? A few examples are, for example, should I say for example one more time? Okay. For example, getting a job. It's not fun. It's not fancy. It could be a fancy job, but regardless, if you don't have a job, you need a job because you need to earn money. And then waking up early, showing some discipline, changing nappies, being ridiculed for making sure the house is all locked up. But of course we're safe, Dad. Doing the right thing, especially when you're not being watched. These little martyrdoms when you'd rather not be doing those things. And we'll get into that a bit more in a minute. The fact of the matter is, becoming a parent means your focus needs to change. It needs to shift. There are new demands on your life which are outside of yourself, and I think this is what the younger colleagues I was mentioning were kind of recoiling against. It's about dying to yourself, because the responsibilities aren't immediately gratifying. You tell your kid to go pick something up. For example, just now, I asked my son to pick up my hat. It was beyond me. He was right next to him. I said, pick up that hat. Could you pass that for me, son? And it took 5 minutes. It wasn't, oh, cheers, thank you, what a great guy. I had to explain to him what a hat was. I had to point to him, and then distract him with something, and then throw something in direction and let him follow, and then he got there in the end. And so it's not a satisfying thing necessarily. It's a funny anecdote and something I might tell someone at work, but it's not immediately gratifying, and we do have to die to ourselves. In that moment, I could have blown my lid and shouted at him and told him he was stupid, but I had to rein it in. Just give me the hat, talk to him nicely, and die to myself. Giving up like these bachelor lifestyles where I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, how I want to do it, so that my family can flourish. A concrete example of this is not just children handing you things, but the battle with technology. Because this is, it's everywhere. It's our phones, it's social media, I remember in the 90s, you used to watch TV, right? I had to explain what adverts were to my child because we were away at a cabin and there was a TV and they were like, why is this thing on? It's like, oh, this is an advert. And you had to explain the concept of adverts to them. You know, you'd have to be sat down in front of the TV at a certain time to watch the show you wanted, and if you didn't, you missed it. But now it's just click, 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 rewind, pause, do whatever you want. It feeds you. And these things are feeding our brains on a very kind of base level, hitting things that are very strong like neurotransmitters of dopamine and inducing like fight or flight responses just to keep you focused. It seems that the world is after us. They want our attention. They want our kids' attention. They want us to be focusing on them and not on us, or not on what we need to do. And the only thing we have really to fight against this, yes, we can reject them and lock them up and turn off your Wi-Fi and what have you, but that's not really living in the world. That's rejecting the world, and we're called to live in the world but not of the world. So what's the response? Like I said, the only weapon we really have against these technologies and social media is just instilling virtue in those under our charge and practicing it in our own lives. Because we're fighting against scientists that have been employed to take our attention away from us, and they're smarter and better at it than we are. But we can make it easier by creating a home environment where virtue is made easy. Maybe turn your technology off at a certain time, but we need to enforce it in ourselves. It's not about setting a set of rules, but about living a certain way. And my final point comes from the Catholic gentleman. I kind of mentioned it earlier with James Baxter, is prioritise your time. The Catholic gentleman has an article about that which is perfect. It talks about the essential role of the father. And it mentions everything I've been saying. As a single man, you can be focused on the man on the street washing cars, on building up your repertoire of tools so that you can be better at a certain thing, be it woodwork, be it, painting, be it something that you want to do. And those things are good. But as a father, there are things that you have to forego for your family. And you have to do things in a certain way. Because being a parent, being a father is a full-time job, and you can't just squeeze it into your schedule. You have to build your schedule around it. I've got a friend, and she's in her 20s, young, unmarried, no responsibilities, and she goes to the gym all the time. And she says, hey, when are we going to the gym? And I say, well, I have to go at 5 a.m. because if I want to stay fit and healthy, I've got to get there before the kids wake up because the kids need looking after. And any time away from my family is a time when I'm not living out my main vocation. So the Catholic gentleman put it in 3 essential elements to live fatherhood. Very simple. Love God, love your wife, and love your children in that order. As I was just mentioning, you don't fit your schedule around your vocation. You infuse your schedule with your own vocation. You build your schedule around your vocation, rather. So when I first got married, I came to realize how annoying having a job was. Now, nowadays it's essential. You need it, and it does serve the family. It does serve your vocation. But I was so annoyed because I'm spending 40 hours a week away from my wife. And that's just the time at work. There's also the commute time. And then when you get home, you need to kind of defrag. And then you've got 2 days of a week where you can actually be married if you've got enough money and enough energy. And so I got really annoyed with my job. Now, you have to do what you have to do. But again, career life, it's one of the things that is promoted in society. What's your career? Choosing career over staying home with your kids, staying home with your wife, building a family. I know in my job it's always, when are you going to do the next paper? What's the next paper on? Are you working towards a master's? And, those things are good. But the question you need to ask is, does this serve my vocation or does this serve my job? We need to pay attention to, and the Catholic gentleman outlines this well, where our focus needs to be. God, wife, children. Are we forming our life around those elements, or are we forming it around our career or around our phone? So 2 weeks ago, I had a morning. Well, I had about 12 hours because I went to sleep as well, where I was single. I lived in a house that was clean. There's no toys anywhere. I woke up when I wanted to. I left when I wanted to. And I had no inconveniences that come with having a family. And it led me to question, who am I serving when I'm feeling like that? Family brings some struggles, but struggle brings the opportunity to be virtuous and an opportunity to show virtue to those that don't know about it yet. So question, what is your life about? Is it about doing something cool for you? Or is it about serving those around you? Ask God. Seek guidance from St. Joseph. And pray for our families. Thanks for listening. Stay curious and stay Catholic. God bless.